The Muppet Movie is considered by most Muppet fans to be the best of their theatrical outings, though many will argue for the merits of some of their later efforts, particularly The Muppet Christmas Carol, and it isn't undeserved either, as I explained in my video on that movie, which you can find a link in the description to. But that being said, the Muppet Movie does have a particular charm to it that none of their later movies were quite able to capture. Though some were obviously more successful than others, and that also doesn't mean they didn't make for good movies in their own right. But the point is, the Muppet Movie holds a special place in the hearts of many a Muppet fan, to the point that even non-fans tend to agree that there's just something about it that makes it impossible to hate. And today, I'd like to go over this movie and explain what exactly makes it so appealing. And obviously there will be spoilers ahead, so in case you somehow haven't seen it yet and don't want to know how it ends, you really shouldn't proceed with this video. Okay, so to start off simply, there are many reasons why the Muppet Movie works as well as it does, with just one being that it never takes itself too seriously. I mean, the movie begins with the characters in a movie theater literally getting ready to watch themselves, which was a novel concept back in 1979, and Kermit even admits to Robin that what they're about to see is only approximately how the Muppets got together. In other words, this movie is telling the audience right off the bat that this isn't really the quote true origin of these characters, and to take what they're seeing with a grain of salt. And not only does that make the movie even more fun to watch, because one doesn't have to be a stickler for details, but it also makes the self-referential and fourth wall breaking moments all the funnier. I mean, there's literally a few times where the characters actually pull out the movie script to ensure that certain events go down the way they're supposed to. Seriously, this movie's extreme self-awareness would make the likes of Deadpool proud. But moreover, it's also smart enough not to break the fourth wall too often and uses those gags sparingly. But another place where this movie works very well is in the premise itself. Because one has to keep in mind that this was a theatrical movie based off characters that were, for all intents and purposes, from a variety show. To put it simply, it would have been very easy to make the movie just a feature-length episode of The Muppet Show, featuring a variety of different skits between the characters while some kind of mishap takes place backstage. Because that's what The Muppet Show was all about. So one would naturally assume that if it was getting a movie adaptation, it would follow the same general premise. And while that could have worked, as we see to an extent what that could have looked like in 2011's The Muppets, Jim Henson and Frank Oz were very smart not to take that approach. Because honestly, that would have dated the film a lot more and limited its rewatchability. But by distancing itself from the format of The Muppet Show and instead going with a more conventional movie format, in this case showing how the Muppets quote got together, it functions much better as a movie. And what majorly helped in that department was that both Jim Henson and Frank Oz saw the characters as real people with lives of their own, which made it easier for them to write a movie for them, and even just imagine them to begin with outside the context of The Muppet Show. And another factor in why they wanted the movie to be different from The Muppet Show was in the special effects, And that in turn is another reason why the movie works so well. Because one has to keep in mind, doing the Muppet Show was pretty easy as far as puppeteering went. And given the limited budget of TV shows, especially in the 1970s, that was definitely a good thing. But with this movie, Jim Henson and Frank Oz really wanted to push the limits of what was possible with puppets. And to that end, did everything they could think of to make the puppets feel as much like real people as possible. And one can't deny that they most definitely succeeded in that department. I mean, only some examples include Kermit in the swamp, which required Jim Henson to cram himself into a tiny tube to film, as well as the famous shot of him riding the bicycle, Fozzie driving a car, which, yes, Frank Oz actually was steering in certain shots, even though he couldn't see, and the apparent logistical nightmare that was Gonzo riding the balloons. And all of this before CGI could help them out, which only makes it all even more impressive to see. But this even extends as far as the characters actually existing in the real world with human beings. I mean, on The Muppet Show, human and puppet interaction was pretty limited. And moreover, they were very rarely seen outside the theater where they performed. But in this movie, the characters are shown freely moving around inside restaurants, stores, carnivals, cars, and pretty much anything else you can think of. And because of how natural it all looks, it only reinforces the idea that these characters are real people with their own lives, to the point that most are apt to forget that they really are just puppets by the time it's over. Because once again, the illusion is just that convincing due to the lengths Jim Henson and Frank Oz went to make them feel that way. And this need to push the limits of special effects even dictated certain story decisions as well. Because the whole subplot about Doc Hopper wanting Kermit to become the mascot of his Frog Legs restaurant, and then wanting Kermit dead when he refuses, came about because the legs of the characters were rarely shown on The Muppet Show. Which does make sense, considering they are puppets and all. But the point is that Jim Henson wanted a lot of emphasis put on Kermit's legs in this movie, specifically because they were hard to show, and thus wrote a great deal of the plot around them. Because Hopper wouldn't have set his sights on Kermit in the first place if he hadn't been so impressed with how his legs looked, and thus his legs are the whole reason Hopper enters the picture. And speaking of that, the Muppets' signature brand of humor being on full display here is just yet another reason the movie works so well. Because, let's face it, the idea of a man owning a Frog Legs restaurant, wanting a real frog as his mascot, and being so petty and vindictive that he goes to increasingly ridiculous lengths to get revenge on him when he says no, is a premise so ridiculous that only the Muppets could play it straight and still have Hopper come across as threatening. And, of course, there are other things, such as the classic fork in the road, Miss Piggy literally falling in love with Kermit at first sight, and all of the perfectly placed cameos by famous comedians in a similar vein to guest appearances on The Muppet Show. To put it simply, the Muppets always had their own special brand of humor, and it's perfectly utilized in this movie to make it a very fun time for both kids and adults alike. Because even though it is a family-friendly movie, it most definitely has plenty to offer for any adults that are willing to watch. but it also knows exactly when not to embrace that trademark Muppet humor and go for that slightly melancholy feeling that they manage to sometimes evoke. And this is perhaps best shown in Gonzo's solo number, of all places, which is more philosophical in nature and not played for laughs at all, as well as Doc Hopper rejecting Kermit's heartfelt speech at the end. Because, being a Muppet movie, you'd think that such a sincere speech about the need for friendship and the emptiness success can bring would be enough to move him. But in the end, it just isn't enough. And that, right there, really says a lot about Doc's character. He just can't let go of his selfish desires and ego, and would rather accept that success comes without friends than try and mend his ways. And as I already noted, only the Muppets could add all of that complexity, and not to mention both horror and tragedy, into the simple words, "Alright, boys, kill him." Though ironically, Jim Henson actually wanted Hopper to redeem himself at the end, but Frank Oz convinced him that it would be better if he didn't. And if everything I've just said isn't proof enough, that definitely was the right choice there. Because, like it or not, there are some people in this world who will never learn, no matter how much some may try. And finally, there's the ending itself, which does manage to evoke rather strong feelings of hope in the audience simply by showing a rainbow, only for it to end on one final gag. And that pretty much sums up the Muppets in a nutshell, because even when they do get serious, it's almost always followed up with humor, which perfectly shows their philosophy of good always prevailing in the end. That, if you'll pardon the expression, there's always a rainbow around every corner. And speaking of rainbows, there is one other thing about the Muppet Movie that must be given praise, which is the musical score and songs. Seriously, there's a reason The Rainbow Connection was nominated for Best Original Song at the Academy Awards, even if it didn't win. Because in the end, all the songs are fantastic and extremely catchy, even apart from The Rainbow Connection. It perfectly embodies the kind of music you'd expect from the Muppets, but moreover can also be enjoyed completely independently of them. Really, moving right along, can you picture that? Never before, never again. I'm going to go back there someday. Take your pick. All of them are great. Paul Williams really outdid himself here. And it's really no wonder they'd later bring him back to write songs just as great for the Muppet Christmas Carol. So, to put it all simply, rather than being just one thing that makes the Muppet Movie so charming, it's a combination of many different elements that makes the movie as good as it is. And if you notice, most of it comes down to things that the Muppets were already well known and beloved for, just being used to their fullest advantage. And once again, because this movie sums up so many different facets of the Muppets so well, it's really no wonder why the Muppet Movie is such a fan favorite. Because simply put, it represents the Muppets at their absolute best, and did that job so well that its many successors have had a difficult time replicating everything about it that arguably made it the perfect Muppet Movie. Okay, I think I've made my point with all of this. So now why don't all of you tell me? Do you believe that the Muppet Movie perfectly embodies everything that the Muppets stand for and is easily the best theatrical film they ever made? Or do you believe it's overrated and that there are other Muppet movies that did a much better job of showing what they stand for? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And please remember that you don't have to agree with anything I said in this video if you don't want to. You can feel about the Muppet movie and how well it sums up the Muppets that you'd like, and I nor anybody else can tell you you're wrong. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate all of it, and I hope to see you all next time.